Stand up.
Hi there. It's Monday. We made it. That's right. You did it. Thank you very much for waking up and getting up and doing the things that you got to do to make it through, pressing play on this daily podcast. I'm your pal Pete, and I am broadcasting from the Hudson Valley today, where I live, right on the Hudson River, just across the old Tappan Zee, now Mario Cuomo Bridge in Nyack, New York. Joining me today on my daily podcast, a first-time guest. She's a vascular surgeon who went to Harvard Medical School. She is a professor at Massachusetts General Hospital, and now she started her own super PAC to help get healthcare workers elected to important positions in government. I'm very happy to have Dr. Anahita Dua joining me for the first time ever today's show. We had an almost hour-long conversation, which became spirited and argumentative at times about healthcare and economic issues, but it was really, I thought, interesting, and hopefully you'll get something out of that conversation. But before that, I've got, of course, all of your headlines and a whole bunch of clips from the weekend, and oh, what a weekend it was. Happy Father's Day to all of you dads out there. I hope that you were able to celebrate. I know all of you who've lost dads have a different kind of mood and day and feeling on that day. If you lost a father that you love and that you miss, and now I've just mentioned him again and I'm making you think about him here at the beginning of the podcast, but I really just wanted to say that I had a great Father's Day. We didn't have really a plan, but my older daughter, Ava, 20, is home from the city for the weekend where she lives, works, and goes to school. And so I got to hang out with her, and then I got to hang out with Julia, who's 17 and works at a cafe, and I hung out there and then with her after her shift was over. And then I went out to dinner with both my daughters. It was really a wonderful, special evening and day. At one point during dinner, we just went to the Yard House at the mall, because whatever, and I had a sandwich that came with some French fries. Didn't have any ketchup, and so I asked the table behind us if I could borrow their ketchup, and it was a wonderful family of black folks. That's right, one man, and I believe there were like 6 women, daughters, wife, sister, I don't know who they were, but I asked to borrow their ketchup. And the one man said to me, absolutely, and happy Father's Day to you, sir. And I said, well, happy Father's Day to you, sir. And this music was playing, because we're at the Yard House, and he goes, doesn't it just make you want to dance? And I looked back at him, and I said, yes, it does. He goes, then we should. And the man stood up and started dancing. And then I started dancing. And what happened next was amazing, because everybody started dancing. All right, not everybody, but this waiter came over and started dancing. Everybody was watching, and it was hilarious. The girls thought it was hilarious. They don't like when I do things that draw attention to us or to me. Often at first they cringe, and often they then end laughing uncontrollably. In this case, I didn't start anything. I was just asking the guy for some ketchup, and he asked me if I wanted to dance, and danced we did. And it was just really fun and funny, and the girls thought it was hilarious, and I thought it was hilarious, and I love that man and his whole family, and he really just sent this moment of levity and love and hope and kindness and humanity, and, you know, it was just really, we were dancing for quite a while, and those of you who saw me dance at Pod Jam know I can dance. And so that became very funny and hilarious to everybody, that the white guy and the black guy were tearing it up at the Yard House. And it was just this random act of awesomeness. And I think it had less to do, by the way, with that he was a black guy and I was a white guy, and more that two men were kind of bonding over celebrating how much joy they took out of being dads. That's how I felt, at least. I don't know. We didn't talk about it, but that's just a positive, good stuff way to start today's show and the week. All right. Well, now let's get to all the other stuff. It's time for headlines and clips. Let's do it. What a weekend in news. You had the president, North Korean style, very embarrassing week celebration parade of United States Army, where even those who were marching did not seem very interested in being there in their casual, out of rhythm stepping. Millions of Americans, of course, hitting the streets in protest over 2,000 different locations, including where I live in Rockland County, New York, in the rain, at least here on the East Coast. The escalation of the war between Israel and Iran continuing. The shocking news that we probably should not be so shocked about when we learned of the assassination of a congressman and her husband, and the attempted assassination of a state senator and his wife in Minnesota. Of course, in case you don't know, the suspect was captured late last night, crawling through a field in Minnesota. We got him, which is really good. It was also Father's Day, as I mentioned yesterday, so those of you that are engaged in the world and our communities are also dads, a mix of emotions and a roller coaster ride. At least it has been for me, paying attention to all of these things, and then the joy that I just described to you that I got to have yesterday. So trying to be grateful for the good stuff as I head into all of these headlines. I mentioned the big arcing stories over the weekend. Here's some of the others that you might have missed. Oil prices are wavering now after the latest war in the Middle East has begun when Israel launched missiles and attacks into Iran. Iran, of course, has now responded. U.S. oil prices jumped last week, which could cause prices at the pump to rise about 20 cents a gallon in the coming weeks, according to one estimate. But things could definitely change even faster if Iran decides to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. The country is a large producer of oil itself, and its position on the northern side of the Strait of Hormuz, a major thoroughfare for oil and liquefied natural gas, means it could severely disrupt global energy markets. Of course, Iran has this economic incentive to allow tankers to continue passing through the strait as it ships oil through that channel. Much of it, by the way, of course, to China, though. The United States has been buying less and less oil from the Persian Gulf. The commodity is traded globally, according to the New York Times, leaving consumers and businesses exposed to price increases. Should U.S. oil companies respond to higher prices by drilling more, it would still take months for that oil to start flowing. That is the New York Times reporting. Here's an interesting story, or way to put it, by NPR for the weekend. That is, military parade and No Kings protests, a split screen of a divided America. Thought that was good wording for a headline. There are events that have become a Rorschach test that brings out, I don't know how it's pronounced. Don't make fun of me. Rorschach test that brings out America's political and cultural divisions in bold relief. Saturday's military parade, which celebrated the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary and also fell on the president's birthday, was that kind of moment as the Trump administration geared up for the parade filled with tanks and armored personnel carriers rolling through the nation's capital. People in dozens of cities across the country protested the event as a politicization of the armed forces by a would-be autocrat. The protests were called No Kings. Yeah, I love that, by the way. I think that's great branding. 2 words, No Kings. Whoever thought of it, I say chef's kiss to that. That's exactly what people always criticize the progressive movement for not doing a good job at. Can everybody get behind No Kings? By the way, the retort from MAGA was, well, obviously we don't have a king, or you wouldn't be able to have your No Kings protests. And we're all saying, yeah, that's what we're trying to prevent. We aren't quite to the part where we can't protest, and the protests took place all over the country and were overwhelmingly peaceful. There were, in the 2,000 or so protests, acts of violence and vandalism, but it was nobody was reporting anything that I think really made a lot of news. It was amazing to be out there with friends and neighbors. I saw many of you, and I appreciate all of those of you who emailed me pictures and thoughts and responses to the No Kings protests over the weekend. Those of you that got to attend, great. Those of you that didn't, it's okay. There's a lot of people reaching out feeling guilty. It's okay. You'll do something. You'll stay engaged. We're happy to have you here. You're not going to be cast out if you aren't pulling your weight at attendance in protests. People often just feel even uncomfortable being around crowds, much less being involved in a protest like that. So no one's going to give you any grief in this community. I won't allow for it. But we appreciate any kind of support that you're giving, if even that includes your engagement with the show, coming to a hangout, whatever it is. We're really happy to have you as part of our community, and I'm so happy that many of you did get out there. And let's get back to some of these other headlines. HHS reinstates more than 450 CDC employees fired in an April reorganization, including childhood lead poisoning team. Oh, good. The experts that prevent kids from getting lead poisoning. have been reinstated. Fantastic. Our Health and Human Services Secretary, Bobby Kennedy Jr., is one hell of a guy. And even though he's not really qualified to be the manager of a grocery store, no offense to grocery store managers, he is somehow the nepoist baby of all nepo babies, gotten himself to this point in life. And it's a wild ride. Wild ride. All right. Back to the headlines. What else can I tell you? How about this? The G7 is opening in Canada. The focus is going to be on trade wars and not upsetting our mad king. Yeah, all the rest of the countries in the G7, which is Japan, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, Germany, and, of course, Canada, are just going to have to treat it like it's nursery school. Here comes the baby. Quiet. Here comes the baby. The baby's coming over here, and he's going to whine, and you're going to have to do your best to accommodate the baby so he doesn't make the lives of our people way harder, which has got to be a hard thing to do. But the White House has apparently not said much about its goals for the G7, which used to be, of course, the G8 when Russia was a member, but they were expelled in 2014 because they annexed Crimea. They took over a part of Ukraine, which really began the aggressive eventual invasion of Ukraine in 2022. We're going to see Trump definitely meeting with at least 3 of the other world leaders starting today. He's going to be with the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, which handled him pretty well in the White House, better than probably anybody. He's also expected to meet with the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, and Volodymyr Zelensky is going to be there, according to an administration official. So it's going to be a lot about tariffs, of course, and it's going to, hopefully he won't embarrass us too badly at these meetings this week in Canada. But prepare for a bunch of headlines to come out of Alberta. That's where it is taking place, by the way. Canada's Rocky Mountains. All right. Another headline that probably went undercovered over the weekend. Hackers took aim at the Washington Post journalists in an apparent targeted cyber attack. Hackers have tried to break into email accounts of a select number of Washington Post journalists. It's not immediately clear who is responsible for the hack. Journalists are regular targets for both state-backed spies who are interested in tracking their reporting before it becomes public and cyber criminals who are interested in extorting news organizations. A spokesperson for the Washington Post declined to comment when asked who might be responsible for the hack. It was first reported by the Wall Street Journal, who was itself a target for an attack in the past. All right, let's see what else. A couple of other quick guns. The House, or rather the Senate, confirmed this scandal-ridden weirdo, bad man Billy Long, to head the IRS because it's bad because he once tried to dismantle the IRS. So Billy Long is now in charge of corrupting the IRS. That is a real scary situation, of course, to learn. DHS ordered 530,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to self-deport or face arrest. I feel like that went undercovered. I do want to mention our Mad King wrote a really long post, abnormally long, like 4 paragraphs on his Truth Social, which he's treating like it's an executive order or a law. I mean, we talk about him being a king. He treats that his announcements that he writes on this or any other social media platform, he usually starts at the one that he owns, are somehow edicts from him. And yesterday, late last night, I guess, he posted this, well, about 8:43 on Sunday night. He basically posted this unhinged, well, they're all unhinged posts, saying that our nation's ICE officers have to continue the very important goal, he said, of delivering the single largest mass deportation program in history. He said, in order to achieve this, we must expand efforts to detain and deport illegal aliens. America's largest cities, such as LA, Chicago, and New York, where millions upon millions of illegal aliens reside. These and other such cities are the core of the Democratic power center. He said these cities are where Democrats use illegal aliens to expand their voter base, cheat in elections, and grow the welfare state, robbing good-paying jobs and benefits from hardworking American citizens. He said these radical left Democrats are sick of mind, hate our country, and actually want to destroy our inner cities, and they're doing a good job of it. There is something wrong with them. That is why they believe in open borders, transgender for everybody, and men playing in women's sports. And that is why I want ICE, Border Patrol, and our great and patriotic law enforcement officers to focus on our crime-ridden and deadly inner cities and those places where sanctuary cities play such a big role. You don't hear about sanctuary cities in our heartland, he wrote. So it's pretty, there's a lot more to it, but that is the most disturbing part. And, of course, it comes after the other night he announced, after hearing, now we have reporting on it, starting with his agricultural secretary, Brooke Rollins, and then from others in other industries, that he was decimating their workforces. So he goes out and he makes the announcement that we can't deport people who have been there for a long time working important jobs. But, of course, then he puts this out. It remains to be seen what ICE is going to do. But, I mean, it sounds like he's just trying to appease his agriculture secretary, and that some of us thought maybe, including me, this might mean something different, or they might pull back on some of these raids and deportations. Those of you who are more cynical or maybe more realist, you're right. It seems as of today. We'll see what the actual policies play out, and if these raids continue, they will be documented because everybody's got a camera in their pocket. At least there's that. All right, well, those are the more undercover headlines. Of course, I mentioned the big stories at the top, and I'll go into detail and probably have some policy experts to talk about things like the Middle East this week and what is happening between Israel and Iran. Of course, I want to talk about the continued threat against Democrats and lawmakers now, and that's very scaring and bone-chilling for anybody who's thinking about running for office or is currently in office. And obviously, there's no comparison between right-wing violence and folks that are liberal or identify in any other way as progressive Democrat or left-wing violence. I saw yesterday Tara Palmieri, who's now an independent journalist, and I know her well. She's been on the show saying, you know, the both sides rhetoric, we have to cool it down, and I'm sick of both sides and all that. Just to be clear, there are statistics on this, so it's pretty disingenuous for a journalist and outrageous for people who know what they're doing to act as if in any way there is an equivalence. Hey, it could get there. People on the left are very upset. Maybe they're going to start getting guns and committing violence. I sure hope we don't get there. But in the over 10 years that I've been covering this issue, domestic terrorism, domestic violence, who's being threatened and for what kind of violence in America, it is overwhelmingly people who live on the far right, who listen to those unhinged voices on talk radio and the internet, and now the President of the United States, who are committing the violence and tried to sack the Capitol in an insurrection to prevent the confirmation of our democratically elected President Joe Biden. I mean, it's just so I just wanted to make that point, and now I'll stop ranting and move on to the clips that I've got for you. All right, those are the undercover headlines. We'll go deeper into all of these other issues that took place over the weekend with guests all this week on Stand Up, many of which you can watch on YouTube, youtube.com/standupwithpete. Go subscribe to that right now if you haven't already, and Substack. If you haven't subscribed to my Substack, I would really appreciate if you did that. I got to figure out exactly how to use it and how I want to use it, but right now, there's almost 2,000 subscribers over there. You can subscribe for free or pay. Eventually, I'll probably shift everything to there because you're a lot more discoverable on Substack than you are on Patreon. But it's a lot. It's a lot of work to make that happen. At Stand Up with Pete on Substack and YouTube. Now let's get to the clips. Every day I've got a clip show for you. I like to start with our friend Kevin Richberg and his brief commentary, which is always similar, that there's only one story that really matters. What is it, Kevin? By the way, I challenged Kevin to work peanut butter and jelly into today's rant. If you want to challenge him to work some word or phrase in, it could make this even more fun. Here we go.
The only story that matters is that President Trump is nowhere near the mark on qualifying to be fit to serve. Before Trump was booed during a Kennedy Center production of Les Miserables, he was asked the most simplistic question possible by a reporter, simple even for him. A journalist asked Trump if he identified with the hero of Les Mis, Jean Valjean, or the villain of the story, Inspector Javert. Trump, who claims this is his favorite musical, said, "That's a tough one." The last part of that question, that's tough, I think. Then he turned to Melania, a false smiles dolly stuffed with money, and that didn't get him anywhere. So he finally settled on, "I don't know." When asked, "Are you the hero or the villain?" he said, "I don't know." The only story that matters is that President Trump can't even self-identify as someone who isn't a villain. An orange makeup villain with a rotted out peanut butter and jelly sandwich where a brain should be. And a villainous peanut butter and jelly sandwich, rotted or otherwise, has no business being president.
Yeah, he did it. Well done. Thank you, Kevin Richburg. Go check out Slate Hill Edible Forest. Go take your money, buy Kevin's honey, and so many other products that he has available. He can make a tree, any kind of tree you want, and ship it to you. Slate Hill Edible Forest. And join us September 5th through 7th for Farm Jam on Kevin's farm. It's going to be a lot of fun. Look for the details and sign up to join us in the show notes of today and every day's show. All right, what else do I have for you? This one activist went viral for her off-the-cuff comments being asked by a journalist, and I'm not sure who she is or who got this, but a lot of people were sharing it from one of the No Kings, and I thought she did a good job representing a lot of us, and I was happy to see a young person out there saying this kind of thing. She was asked, by the way, by the reporter, what do you think about the president having a birthday parade while you guys are out here doing this?
I can remember in 2016 all the propaganda that was put out on North Korea and how they had a show for Kim Jong-un's birthday and all the rockets that they displayed and the nuclear weapons. And the West took that as an insult and kind of a threat. Well, I see absolutely no difference in what's happening in D.C. right now. It's an absolute waste of tax dollars in any kind of way that you can put it. It's a threat. It's a threat to the American people that says if you step out of line, we will destroy you. We will take everything you love away. And I'm not going to stand for that. This is America, and you are nothing without the American people. And I want you to know that. If you're not angry, you're not listening. You need to be aware. It is your civic duty to care about what's going on. I don't care if you're Democratic or Republican. You have a constitution that says freedom of speech. You have a constitution that says freedom of the press. You have a living document that lives and breathes for the people. And that man is using it in corrupt, demonic ways. And he wants to talk about how the LGBTQ, how black communities, how POCs, how immigrants are the devil. That's only one devil I can see, and he sits in the White House. You should be angry. You should be out here with us. They don't care about you. These people, and you should show them, all of these people out here. These are the people. This is their country. This Capitol building, people are supposed to come here and represent us. And they won't. So I will represent me. That's what I have to
say. Wow. She was in D.C. That's where she was. That was great. Shared that with my daughters. It was, I was very happy to see a young person out there at my protest, my rally in Rockland County where I attended. It was overwhelmingly over 40 and white, and I was happy to see that. I mean, we are the ones who should be out there on the line, but obviously I'm happy to see young folks out there as well. Anytime people of color want to come out and stand with us or behind us so that we can stand in front of them whenever possible, the way I see it, then we're happy to have everybody, obviously, out there protesting in these streets. All right. We'll see you out there. All right. Let's go to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the end of the week, an oversight hearing. I just thought this was a very, very effective and important rant. You may have seen clips from this hearing when they had these blue state governors, including Mr. Pritzker out there in Illinois who may be running for president. I just thought this was very good back and forth that demonstrated exactly what is happening and why. Well done.
They are trying to end legal status in the United States as well. Correct, Governor Pritzker, with the end of TPS and making people undocumented by removing legal status, ending legal status, and then having the audacity to call them illegal when they were here documented, correct?
Taking students' visas away from people, taking their legal right to be in the United States away from them when they've been granted maybe years earlier to stay.
So I don't want to hear about how this is about illegal versus legal immigration. They are attacking legal status and removing legal status. The Republican majority is anti-legal immigration in the United States. And I want to make that very clear.
Yeah, well done. All right. Now we go from AOC to former senior aide in the Biden White House turned media guy. His name is Daniel Coe. He has got a podcast. He's going on cable news, and he joined the table over on, I think it was Fox News Sunday. So he's good right there in the lion's den. I like his commentary. He's very good at this, so I wanted to share it.
Look, I think if this is a president who wanted to honor the military, he wouldn't be proposing 80,000 VA cuts. If this is a president who actually cared about the military, he wouldn't be freezing $2 billion worth of contracts or having a Secretary of Defense leaking attack plans on Signal. In contrast, we had people from Idaho to Ohio to Arkansas to Massachusetts stand up and say that this country, with due process being taken away, with children being separated from their mothers, is not something we stand for. People will not take this lying down, and this is just the beginning.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is just the beginning. More from Dan Coe, appearing on Fox News Sunday.
The bigger concern here is the Trump administration's response to crisis, right? We saw in St. Louis that it took 5 days for FEMA to come to the aid of people at St. Louis. We're seeing an antagonistic relationship between local elected officials and the Trump administration. My big concern is when the first big hurricane comes, will they be there and will they have the back of local officials when lives are on the line?
All right, Dan Coe, good stuff. I'm going to get that guy on the show, I think. All right, here's Ken Martin, the embattled leader of the Democratic National Committee. He was on talking about the violence against these two Minnesota lawmakers, and I thought this was good, so I wanted to share it.
This is wrong. We have to call it out for what it is. And you know what? There is no doubt that that has been fomented by the far right in this country, and extremism and violent rhetoric that exists in the far reaches of the internet that we have allowed to seep into this country as it's now commonplace to just go out and assassinate people that you disagree with. Well, it's bullshit. And I'm just telling you right now, none of this should happen in this country. Let's solve our differences through the ballot box. Let's solve our differences by finding common ground. No one should be going out there and assassinating people they disagree with.
All right, Ken Martin, well done. I thought that was pretty well stated. Let's go to the senator who was at the center of this awful situation the end of last week. Senator Padilla, who was tackled by FBI agents when he crashed Department of Homeland Security Secretary and fake cowgirl Kristi Noem's press conference. He was on Sunday's Face the Nation on CBS, where Margaret Brennan gets the statistic wrong about mass deportations, by the way, and she was highly criticized for getting this wrong. But here is Senator.
Because the public approval is so high of deportation.
But details matter. It depends, as you know, it depends on how you ask the question. If you ask the same people, do they think we should maintain due process in the United States of America? The answer is overwhelming yes. Mm-hmm. Do dreamers deserve better than the limbo that they find themselves in? Overwhelmingly, on a bipartisan basis, yes. And so I think it's important to break down three things. Number one, do we need a safe and secure, orderly, humane border? Absolutely. No disagreement there. People seeking to come to the United States, whether it's to seek asylum on work visas, et cetera, we definitely have to modernize that system and be more strategic in those capacities. But we can't forget the millions of long-term residents, people who have been here, working, paying taxes, raising families, buying homes, contributing to the strength of our economy. They deserve better.
Immigration expert to follow is Aaron Reichlin-Melnick, real smart guy, and he tweeted about that or posted on Blue Sky about it. Forgive me. He writes, Margaret Brennan is fundamentally wrong on the claim that public approval of mass deportations is, quote, so high. It has never been above 60% and has been below 50% in multiple recent polls. There's no world in which that counts as so high. And then later on went to correct again. Brennan is just wrong here. Lazy journalism based on assumptions, old data, and misinformation shows you how much damage certain high-profile pundits can do to the information environment. Very easy to look at all the data like we do. That's GElliotMorris.com, who looks at the data. And one more fact check on that. Kevin Cruz writes, according to the latest WA poll, Schar School poll, Trump's handling of deportations has 37% approval, 52% disapproval, and Quinnipiac it's at 40% approval, 56% disapproval. But Face the Nation insists public approval is so high on deportation. I'm hoping that the producers over there get that right, and because Margaret Brennan tries to get it right, doesn't want to get it wrong, and in this case, I don't think but in this case she did. So hopefully people understand that. And by the way, when you ask a poll question about violent criminals versus nonviolent people who are at work, the numbers are far lower. People do not want undocumented people who are working and living in the shadows necessarily deported. They want them out of sight and out of mind, but they don't want them deported. I'm not trying to give people too much the benefit of the doubt here. Let's be honest. All right, now a little bit more. There's more from that interview that I did want to share with you from Face the Nation. Here we go.
Democrats say that Secretary Noem should resign. Is that where you are?
Look, that's maybe not my focus right now, but I do think there's some serious questions. How does the cabinet secretary not know the senator from California when she steps foot into Los Angeles? She came through the Center for confirmation at one point. And certainly, how does the Secretary of Homeland Security not know how to de-escalate a situation? It's because you can't or because they don't want to. And it sets the tone. Donald Trump and Secretary Noem have set the tone for the Department of Homeland Security and the entire administration in terms of escalation and extreme enforcement actions.
Okay. I also wanted to just share this quick clip of Rand Paul criticizing the president's military parade birthday fiesta. Here he is on NBC. Meet the press.
You know, I'm all for the president appearing and doing enlistment ceremonies at military bases. I've been with the president at Dover to receive home our dead soldiers, and so those who have been killed in action, and to mourn their loss. But I just never liked the idea of the parade, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and the only parades I can remember are Soviet parades for the most part, or North Korean parades. And the parades I remember from our history were different. You know, everybody remembers that famous scene of the soldier, you know, dipping the girl and kissing the girl in New York in a ticker tape parade. But we were rejoicing the end of war, and we were rejoicing our soldiers coming home. And that absolutely ought to be commemorated and discussed every year, Memorial Day, Veterans Day. But we never glorified weapons so much. And I know he means well. I don't think he means for any of this to be depicted in another fashion, but I'm just not a big fan. And then there is the cost. I mean, we're $2 trillion in the hole, and just an additional cost like this, I'm not for it.
Okay, thank you, Rand Paul. And finally, here is Karen Bass on CNN yesterday with Dana Bash. Karen Bass, Dana Bash. It's not easy to say. People should upgrade their subscriptions just for that talent.
The last time National Guard troops were federalized, by the way, that time, of course, that was at the request of the governor, not over the objections of the governor. That was in 1992. You were there. You were at the corner of Florence and Normandy when the 1992 riots erupted after that Rodney King verdict. Can you compare what's going on now to what happened then at all?
I really appreciate that question. There is zero comparison. What you were talking about that is happening in downtown Los Angeles is about maybe 1 or 2 square miles of a city that is 500 square miles. In 1992, and you're absolutely correct, I was at the epicenter when it was occurring. It was a citywide civil unrest. It was the nation's worst in terms of the most costly, the number of people died, the number of people arrested. There is no comparison. And unfortunately, that is what is being pushed, as though the city is in chaos. There's civil unrest everywhere. For most Angelenos, they're like, well, what city are they describing? They are definitely not describing Los Angeles.
All right. Well, there you go. That is all of the audio. That is the clip show. Those are the headlines. Now it's time to get to my guest. We're 34 minutes in. I'm sorry. I'm not ending with any comedy clips. I'm running super late already. I want to get this posted up for you to listen to. All right. She is a physician who is trying to get other physicians and healthcare workers to run for office with her super PAC, Healthcare for Action, healthcareforaction.com. They say never before has public health been as crucial to the health of our nation as it is today, from reversing climate change, preserving access to abortion, and curbing the epidemic of gun violence. We must take action now. As a doctor and as a mom, Dr. Dua decided to start Healthcare for Action PAC to support medical professionals who are running for office. She's, of course, a vascular surgeon. She's a big deal. She is a Harvard med school grad. She teaches at Mass General, where she's a professor. Of course, she's a surgeon regularly. She's a practicing clinical surgeon, gives speeches all over the country. We had a great conversation, which became, at times, I was pushing back a lot on some of the assertions that she was making around both healthcare and just socioeconomics in terms of social mobility and more. But it was great. We were supposed to only do like 20 minutes, but we ended up talking for almost an hour. Hopefully you take something from our discourse and let me know. I'd like to hear from you and what you think about this conversation. This is the first time that Dr. Anahita Dua has been on the show, and I'm very happy to have her, so I hope you like it. Here we go. Dr. Anahita Dua, am I saying your name correctly?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to talk to you. How intimidating. I mean, a vascular surgeon at a big, important hospital, it went to Harvard. I mean, we're excited to have access to you as an expert. So let's do it. Excited to talk to you. Why medicine? Why did you choose this?
I just love the idea of being able to like master something scientifically that then you can apply real world to a patient. In all honesty, I mean, a lot of people kind of give nonsense answers about just these frilly feeling things. But the fact of the matter is that nowadays life is really long. And I wanted to do something where every day did not feel like work. And taking care of people ultimately is the coolest thing, because you have to be like razor sharp at all times, but at the same time have a mastery of the information, but also have humanity. So what a cool thing. And it's all coming together in medicine, which is why I decided to do it.
Is that why droids can't replace you? Because they can't do the last thing, the humanity?
Oh, I don't know. Droids can give hugs. So I think it's coming.
Well, we could talk about AI, maybe now, maybe another time, and what that means for medicine, specifically surgeons, and even more specifically vascular surgeons. I'm sure you use all kinds of different really cool machines and so on already. But just real quick, I'm a parent of daughters, 17 and 20. So like, who were you as a teenager? Like when you said mastering things, like what kind of kid were you that led you into med school?
Oh my gosh. I was a naughty kid. I was a very, very naughty kid. Actually, many years ago, and I don't know if this is weird, but this is what happened. I had a little budgie, so a little bird that was a pet, and I loved so deeply. And one day I went off to school. I was in about maybe 3rd, 4th grade, something like that, went off to school. And when I came back, my beautiful little bird was dead. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like what happened? And the only thing I could think of to do was to dissect it to see if something was wrong. And I had no idea what I was looking for. And I don't know if this makes me a weirdo, but I went and I took it to the backyard and I tried to dissect it to see if its quote heart was working, even though I didn't, again, know what I was doing. And just for all of you out there, what happens at that point is the bird was in rigor mortis, which means the knife did nothing. And I just looked like a psychopath trying to dissect this bird and was completely unsuccessful, and then went off into med school. And I've always been that type of person. Like, I just want to know. I need to know.
Is it true that when you did finally get the bird open, you found a 9-volt battery and you didn't need to be an expert to realize, how did he get near my batteries?
I did not, but now that you're saying it, I'm starting to question my life.
Well, I was already, you lost me when you said you had a bird as a pet. What kind of a monster were you? I mean, who puts a bird in a cage?
Blame my mommy. She wouldn't let me have a dog. So, but I don't anymore. Now I'm all about animals. I do a lot of animal rescue, and I actually had 12 pit bulls once in my house at the same time. Wow. Because with those dogs, there's a lot of like pit bull rescue because they get put up in the fighting side of things. And so these pit bulls sometimes get bred, and then what will happen is they have to euthanize all the puppies and then put the mom up for adoption unless someone can take all of them and get them to the point.
Oh, look at you. You're a saint. And not only that, you're debunking the myth about pit bulls and their tempers or their propensity to violence, I guess, right? That's a myth.
Totally a myth. Oh my God. They just need hugs. Those droids can come hug the pit bulls too.
Very well done. Right? Why vascular surgery? That's like veins and arteries and blood stuff?
It is exactly that. And you just answered it in yourself. Of all the liquids that come out of a human being, the one that is the least gross, in my opinion, is blood.
Oh,
and
for
so
sure.
That's why.
I mean, just name any of the others in case, and we don't know, most of us don't know most of them, but we know the primary ones, and yeah, that you've got a winner. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well.
And I like the idea of keeping blood inside people's bodies. And, vascular is really cool because it allows you to, be kind of the one that gets called when something goes wrong. Surgeons are pretty cool people, but the one thing that terrifies surgeons in general is bleeding, because with bleeding, people can die. It's kind of like a fire in a house. Everyone's running out of the house, but the firefighters are going towards it. Vascular surgeons are like the firefighters of the surgical world.
So just to be fair, I mean, it would be weird, but I guess still have to ask, like, when you see blood, if someone gets in an accident or yourself, and you get a cut or something, do you at all get weird about that? That makes no sense to ask a vascular surgeon.
I'm so into it. I will just make it stop. So, honestly speaking, to a vascular surgeon, what's way more dangerous than bleeding? Clotting. If you clot, that's when you get your heart attack, your stroke, your leg gets cut off. So I'm all about stopping the clotting and stopping the bleeding.
So given, like, my issue is I've been talking to physicians for years and years and years, all different kinds of physicians, including researchers. And so what I've come to the conclusion that nobody seems to definitely know everything about everything. And, studies and scientific research and randomized controlled studies, blind randomized, all this stuff, the research talk. I'm certainly humble enough to know that if you don't do research for a living, you're not doing research on Google. But all that being said, do you feel like there's a scientific consensus around anything to do with diet, exercise, and or obviously genetics when it comes time to taking care of your heart and blood tunnels?
Oh, definitely. I mean, science is ever changing. Obviously, with newer information that we learn, the more we can uncover and discover what things should be changed. And we all know, even within our lifetimes, things have sort of gone back on themselves. But usually it's because there's a nuance to it. For example, red wine is bad. Now it's good. And for the heart. But if you drink like 3 bottles of red wine a night, obviously that's bad.
Moderation, right.
Moderation, exactly. And you need to be able to take the time to digest the scientific information, understand those nuances, because that's what it's all about. And I think the mistake we all make these days is we take these bite-sized, 250 character headlines and then try to apply them to our lives and get it wrong. And so I do think there's consensus, but you have to take the time to figure out what that is before you implement it.
Okay, so just for example, then there must be some consensus that you rely on for your own health and the health of your loved ones in terms of diet, nutrition, exercise, or anything that you can control. So give me 1 or 2 tips, and then we're going to get into the real nitty-gritty of politics and everything.
Oh, absolutely. I think the most important thing, honestly, in terms of your health is your mental health. And I don't mean mental health like depression and anxiety and whatnot. Your body really follows how your mind is. You do need to be happy and healthy in a way that allows you to be able to eat properly, sleep properly, and function on a day-to-day basis in a society. Human beings are animals that function in a society and need others around us. And so when your mind is in a happy place, whatever that may be, with a high-intensity job, with your kids, doing sports, everything else sort of follows. You do then eat right and live right and make good decisions for yourself. But I think if you just force on somebody, hey, listen, you have to drink a glass of milk a day for calcium, people just can't really function in that environment where they don't have the why and they don't have the context. So the biggest tip I can give you is be happy. And whatever it is that it takes to make you happy, do it.
Love it. I think that's a great answer. Although milk, isn't that pretty bad for you? But everything in moderation, right? Everything in moderation.
Depends on the type of milk.
Yeah.
and what that, it's funny you say that, because exactly, if you're looking at it from a fat standpoint versus you're looking at it from a calcium standpoint versus you're looking at it from a hydration standpoint, you get different answers. And that's why the nuances are important.
Listen, I like milk as an ingredient in things, but the idea of drinking a glass of milk for calcium, I'm always like, don't I get that better somewhere else than a glass of milk? Let's not get caught up on milk. Listen, I love it. I love what you said about taking care of your emotional health, your mental health is so important. I think hopefully that resonates with folks when they hear it, because everything else comes secondary. And my understanding is physicians, and I don't know if it's a higher percentage of surgeons, deal with depression at way higher rates and burnout. Is that right?
That's completely right. And it's interesting when you think why, because I was kind of scared of the question, because luckily you didn't ask me what I do for my health, because what I do is drink Diet Coke and eat chocolate bars, and don't sleep and all the things that I have to do to be a good surgeon. But that's not ideal. But the real thing, the real reason that surgeons are burned out is interestingly not at all to do with patients. In fact, it's the opposite. It used to be that I used to get to be with my patients one-on-one, but now that silly computer and the electronic health record and the insurance companies and the government and all these other things are injecting themselves between me and my patient and pushing us further and further apart, making me less and less happy and fulfilled in my job because I don't get to be with my patient. And so that's what's really happening.
I feel like that's really interesting and all important. And I'm trying to prevent myself from asking follow-up on each one you say and stick to kind of moving ahead to some of these other subjects I know I want to ask you about, which I feel like this conversation with a new guest, a new physician, I've always got to ask just the starting point about America's healthcare system. And, my understanding of any conversations about healthcare have to be about access, quality, and cost, the three-legged stool. Does that sound like a good kind of place to start out with any conversation?
Absolutely. 100%.
So where were you as a critic of America's healthcare system before certainly this administration? Because I started learning and talking about it with experts back when President Obama was and healthcare reform began. I started learning about health policy, health economics, and so on. So what were your feelings like before Trump was reelected about where we were at and where we needed to go on that three-legged stool?
Well, it's a great question specifically for me because I went to medical school in Scotland. And so I have worked and lived through the NHS, which is a fully, socialized healthcare system, and seen the negatives of that. There are positives, but there are a lot of negatives with that, which you can just open up a newspaper from the United Kingdom and it'll tell you. That's not coming from me. On the other hand, you've got the United States where we really want to be the very best, and we want to give the very best in care to our patients and allow access to these incredible things that can allow you to live longer. But at the same time, the number of patients that can actually get it because of insurance is small. And part of the reason for that that's not ever spoken about actually is the whole issue with malpractice. So if you, for example, come to the hospital tomorrow with a headache and you show up in the ER, as a defensive mechanism, even though I'll have a conversation with you and be like, oh, you're just having a migraine and 99% sure you're having a migraine, I may get I will get a head CT scan on you, which is a lot of money. It's thousands of dollars just because I want to make sure that 1% it's not brain cancer. And that's all got to do with defensive medicine in the United States because of the ability of the sue culture that we have. And so tort reform is a big part of the conversation as well. So really that's the fourth leg of that stool. So honestly, my criticisms of the United States in terms of the healthcare system was that, one, we don't educate our masses in a way that we teach them healthy living so that we don't focus on prevention. We focus on that firefighting. And so patients show up when they're very, very sick. And then you have to hemorrhage money into the system to get them out of that situation. The second piece of it is that we are wild in terms of our sue culture and in terms of our accountability between the patient and the doctor. And the third big thing is that we allow the interaction to happen between kind of like a patient can just walk into my clinic and say, I want to see a vascular surgeon, my legs hurt, but maybe it's a back problem. Right. And a primary care doctor would have been able to suss that out and gotten the appropriate care, but we don't have enough primary care doctors. All these things are negative. On
the fourth leg of the stool, my understanding is that malpractice reform would not actually do much to reduce health spending, according to my friend Dr. Aaron Carroll. He wrote this article in the New York Times and looked at all the studies about that. So some parts of it are counterintuitive. I'd love to hear you and him talk about it together, and we could dig deeper. But I want to move on to another issue, which I find when comparing America's healthcare system. You mentioned NIH, but you could go to Canada or Israel or Japan or anywhere else you wanted. France, I think the WHO says is the best, however they rate things, who knows. But I feel like, and this is me feeling, not using any data, that it's a cultural issue too, where in those other countries, certainly I know Canada best, just culturally, they would be aghast at the idea that everybody doesn't have access to health insurance. And my understanding is a lot of foreigners look at us and they look at that as one of the top things. Like, how do you not have at least access for everybody to health insurance in the richest country in the world? What I mean culturally, and we can pick up, a topical issue and what the Trump administration is trying to do to, quote, save money. They're saying that you have to work, you have to have a job to get health insurance, government, affordable Medicaid. They want, quote, able-bodied people to have to work. I think that's culturally offensive. I think that the biggest loser in the world, bad person, that doesn't work at all should have access to health insurance regardless of who they are and whether or not they work. And I think that the rest of the world believes that to a certain extent too. Healthcare is a right, at least access to it. That's a cultural thing that I feel like we have to start with that a lot of other countries find detestable. What do you think? You would know more.
It's that is actually a really good point. But here's the breakdown of that. So when I was in the United Kingdom, years ago, when I was in medical school, I remember this case because it made the newspapers. There was a woman who was basically she was like in her 40s or 50s, something like that. And she had a couple of kids. Okay. And she had a breast cancer that required a particular type of drug that would have allowed her to live like a year or 2 years more than she was currently going to be able to live. And the NHS denied her that drug, saying that from a cost effectiveness standpoint, it didn't make sense because essentially, and this wasn't in the article, but I'm just saying that drug for that one woman, that the money that would have cost to cover that could have paid for aspirin, for example, for the entire country for 10 years. Let's just make that up. And that would be preventative for heart attack and stroke and whatnot for a certain number of people. So culturally, speaking of culturally, the UK culture, the Canadian culture almost accepts this type of thing where they get it, the cost effectiveness side of thing, where they say, okay, this mom who could have lived another 2 years on this fancy drug, she was going to pass away and not get the drug, but in exchange, these X amount of people are going to get it.
It's called rationing, right?
Correct. And I don't think Americans ever would get behind it. And I personally am also against it. I think that if we're going to say, because there's a difference between everybody gets healthcare and everybody gets bad healthcare. Like I would rather it be like, this is the top tier and we work it out that everybody gets the top tier. But what I'm not okay with as a doctor is bringing the tier down to say everybody now gets it, which is a way of some of these countries do function. And so the danger is, from a cultural perspective, that's the thing. And America would never tolerate that. We shouldn't tolerate that.
Well,
but I don't know how to change it so that all of us would get enough health care.
But there's no way. But my understanding, to belabor rationing one more moment, is there is no possible way to give everybody everything. At some point, you don't get your medicine, or if you're 95, we're not paying for a knee reconstruction.
See, that's the cultural thing. Like, so 95.
It's not. But I'm saying it's not a cultural thing. I'm saying it is a cost thing. You literally cannot afford. You made the point better than I did about the pills. But go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no. I'm just saying that when I say a cultural thing, in America, we are an individualized society. And if it's my 95-year-old knee and I'm running around versus a nursing home resident 95, I think we would, that was the whole thing about, remember the death panels and all that nonsense that they were talking about the whole idea? That's that. So, you would need to have a society that would collectively get behind the idea. And, we could be less simplistic than just the age, but we would say like, okay, a person that fits certain criteria where their life expectancy is not going to be more than a year, we shouldn't be doing dialysis or whatever else. But America as a country would have to get behind that. And in fact, 90% of the healthcare spend on people is within the last 10 years of their life. So imagine how much money we would save if we said, but then, what should it be? 65, 85? Who's going to decide? Is a Nancy Pelosi the same thing as a woman her age in a nursing home on a bed?
Right, yeah.
That's the question.
There's a lot of questions you raise about that, but those are more like, I find those to be more fundamental, thoughtful, even moral discussions about healthcare. I don't find, back to my earlier point, and maybe you disagree, the idea of connecting employment to access to health insurance. And, furthermore, job lock is the issue. And it's certainly, I could argue it from a conservative standpoint, the idea that I have to stay at this shitty job that I don't like and not go out on my own and start my own thing because I can't afford health insurance alone is uniquely American, as is medical bankruptcy. That's uniquely American. But just to the question of the idea that I have to have a job to be able to get Medicaid, what do you think of that? I don't think any other country thinks that's a good idea.
I think what you said earlier about healthcare being a right, 100%. I actually think one of the fundamental problems, as you were pointing out, so I'm in 100% agreement with you that, and not only that, even if I disagreed, even if I believed that you needed a job to get, we know from the data, Georgia has tried this already. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work. In fact, because what do you mean by job? If I'm working part-time at Chick-fil-A, am I getting my, breast implants? Like, what are we talking about?
It's also just stupid. No, you're so right. It's just it's a dumb thing. You could maybe say that about some other government program that gives you money for food or something else. But the idea that you are incentivized to go take any job, much less a crappy job, so that you can go see the doctor, which I don't want to do anyway. I don't want to go to the doctor or the dentist. I don't take most of us don't want to go get healthcare because it's scary and painful and all the rest. So it's a weird thing to think that you would be incentivized for. And mostly it's the kind of thing that we think about, getting insurance for our kids more than anything else, I suppose. Right. That's the incentive. Okay.
And our older family members. But that the problem with that is, and like you said, it is in fact uniquely American, is not just, forget even the patients. My husband ran a company for years and then sold it recently. And even he, the premiums that have to be paid to have people on the payroll, he's having to cut people's hours and do all this manipulation, which he doesn't want to do. He's a great guy. Obviously I married him, so we want to make sure that people are taken care of, but the government has dumped this major thing that they are responsible for, the health of the population, on their small businesses, and small businesses are getting affected. So if you want to talk about it from a conservative standpoint, actually it hurts, from the Republican standpoint, hurts those guys too. And the answer is clearly that this, in my opinion, that it needs to be a tiered system. I don't believe in a completely free environment either, because we already know from a lot of public health data that when you make something free, it can be misused or not used appropriately. And you can get lopsided situations where you have too many specialists and not enough primary care, and you can have issues like that. So I think that people should pay in based on their economic level, but everybody should pay for, you can call it insurance, we can call it whatever we want, into the system, where then everybody gets a top tier level of healthcare that the government decides what the metrics are. So we say, if you are this type of patient and you need that knee replacement, you will get it if you have done your share, not necessarily at the time, like I have a job at the time, but over your lifetime.
I want to talk more about that, but I want to ask you about how you got into politics. You are a practicing surgeon at a big deal hospital. How many surgeries do you do a day or a week, by the way?
Lots and lots and lots. I operate. It depends on how long they are sometimes, because I'm a vascular surgeon. Yeah. They can go for 12 hours. They can be about half an hour. A lot of it depends on my anesthesia colleagues and how quickly they get my patients in the room. And so I'm really operating quite a bit, actually. So I primarily am operating all the time.
You do 12-hour surgeries?
I do 12-hour surgeries.
How is that possible? Do you take a break? You must take breaks.
We don't take. You'd be amazed, actually.
You stand there and
you don't feel it. You don't feel the need to pee. You don't feel the hunger. When it stops, then you do. That's
okay. Moving on. How do you even have time, and what was your interest in getting involved in politics and creating this PAC?
So you mentioned yourself, I'm a doctor, and my whole life I've been kind of fed from my family, who also has a bunch of doctors in it, that being a doctor is a really big deal. You become a doctor and you're special, and people will listen to you, and you'll get to help people, and you'll get to impact the way the world is. And more these days, that's just not true, because at the end of the day, everyone has a boss. And unfortunately, in this day and age, we, the physicians, are subjected completely to the laws and regulations that the government makes, which used to be somewhat logical, but now are way off course. For example, what you just described about healthcare, I literally cannot take care of a patient that, I'll give you an example. I'm a vascular surgeon. I get called to the ER. There's a patient there who is homeless and has a horrible gangrenous foot. I can take him into the hospital and I can do what I need to do to save their life, but then I can't see them postoperatively in my clinic because their insurance and this and that. And I didn't make that rule. The hospital stops me because that's the law, that they don't have to see patients outside of the immediate acute setting. And that's why we have such major bills and such major issues.
Sure, because that's what healthcare is. The ER is not healthcare. The ER is, you're going to die and I'm going to save you, but it's not preventative, and it's not long term. It is. Right. By the way, that was a law though, right? Under Reagan, they passed a law that if people come to the ER, it doesn't matter, by the way, if they're undocumented, doesn't matter who they are. If you come to the ER in America, you get care. That's the law, right?
Right. Well, you get, that's the thing. You get immediate
emergency care.
You have a heart attack, I'll stop you from having that heart attack, but then you're out on the street without the meds that you need to survive. So what's the plan? You're just going to claw off your stent and show right back in my ER in 6 months. What am I doing? What are we doing? So the point is, I recognize that who's responsible for this stuff? Why am I subjected to these rules? Because this is what the government has laid out. And it's not, the government responds to the people. So the people need to be messaged that, like, dude, this is not right. This is how we change it. This is the law that needs to be passed. And so I realized that the doctors were not getting their messaging out there. And that's why I started Healthcare for Action, which is a PAC that specifically works to put healthcare workers into federal office. We do a lot of local stuff as well. And we teach physicians how, and not just, by the way, not just physicians, nurses, PT, literally anybody healthcare, even adjacent, to message. And it's the thing about it, though, is that it's not just about healthcare. Of course, like healthcare is in and of itself a major part of the United States, but also a doctor is great in Congress, because if you come in sick, right, and you're lying in the bed dying, and I am fighting with the infectious disease doctor and saying, I want to do this surgery for him. And the infectious disease doctor is like, no, I want to give these antibiotics. We don't stand and fight over your body as you die. We go outside and we figure it out. And then we come back in and I say, all right, I'm not going to operate on you today, but I'll operate on you tomorrow. We've come to a compromise. You get the, and we do what's best for you. And you in this situation is America. That's the analogy. So doctors are very good at saying, all right, I did with you on abortion, but we're talking about this road in Louisiana right now, so let's get this done. And that's why physicians, specifically healthcare workers, are very good in the job that really one should be doing in the Senate, in Congress, and in the White House.
Yeah, no, I love it. Although there's a lot of physicians that I think are voting antithetically to even their own backgrounds and what science would say. We could point to some and get into it, but I mean, let's get into some of the specifics with what we are seeing. I mean, well, first of all, I mean, I think it's best probably to focus on most vulnerable communities when it comes to healthcare. Who's most vulnerable? And I just want to ask you just about women's health in general. We could be specific about women's reproductive health, but if we, women and apparently, brown and black women are even more vulnerable and to all kinds of different maladies, obviously. And so I wonder what's changed in the past couple of years. Certainly, obviously, we all know about the rules, the laws around women's reproductive health and access to abortion care. But people don't realize how much more clinics like Planned Parenthood did and so on. And I think often how many more needs women need, especially around reproductive issues and the cost of them. So anything about what's changed there and what you would love to see these people that you help getting elected vote on policy-wise that would affect women?
Well, any type of healthcare, regardless of who the person is, really starts when they're born, right? In fact, even before they're born, like in the womb, being cared for in a way that their health is always focused on the prevention aspect and not on the response aspect. And so educating people and kind of getting them into a lifestyle that allows them to keep diseases away is the key. So I'll give you a scenario. I myself am a brown woman. And, in the Indian community, for example, like Indian community, we have a very high rate of heart attacks and stroke because there's a lot of diabetes, and a lot of it comes from the genetics, but a lot of it also comes from the food that we eat. And educating our population specifically that just because you're not fat doesn't mean that you don't have these underlying things. Like there's some very skinny people with diabetes, and like kind of educating them about this and maintaining their blood sugar so that ultimately they don't go on to have that heart attack. So the problem is, back to your original question about what can health policy do? Well, the policy aspect of it needs to bring forward some of that teaching, training, and infusion of policy in the early stages of life so that the person never gets to that amputation 10 years down the line because the diabetes is out of hand. So it's the same thing in education. We're trying to say, all right, let's bring in, affirmative action to get a certain number of people into colleges. But the real way to actually deal with this issue is to go back to kindergarten and get people into pre-K earlier on with the right resources, not come, at the college level and start messing around up there. It's fine, but it's not going to work. It's not sustainable. It's not scalable, and it's not the intelligent way to approach it. So that's what I mean. Your
comprehensive answers aren't as fun as piecemeal nitpickities. And I thought you might say something like, I will ask you, because again, staying with talking about women and then getting to vaccines in general, like the HPV vaccine does exactly what you were saying a broader view of health does, specifically in that if girls get it when they're 11, 12, whatever time is recommended, it has been proven to prevent cervical cancer later on in life. Like doing that one thing, that one vaccine is a miracle. And so are so many others that now the federal government, led by an absolute crazy person, is making harder to access or harder to get to begin with, or creating questions and seeding doubt about something that for years was seen as a public health miracle, almost more than almost any other thing. What are your thoughts on what they're doing to vaccines and what the public's starting to having their views changed on about it?
You know, this is my honest answer about this. It's not about the vaccines. It's not about the vaccines. This is what the Democrats and the progressives have to get. This is about sticking it to the man. These people who are living in this, the people that you described, who are making all these moves on vaccines and masks and, international students and all these things that we're seeing, it's not about the actual causes. It is about taking a stance against whatever they believe the liberal elite think. If you decide today as a liberal elite, like if all Democrats decided that, Hershey bars are the best thing in the world, tomorrow there will be a law that says, no, it's Cadbury chocolate. And so I know it's a silly, ridiculous thing to say, but that's what I mean. So then the problem is that we're fighting them on the science front, saying, no, vaccines make sense, but it's not about that. They are mad because of what happened during COVID. That's what's going on. There has always been a little bit of an underground kind of sideline movement against vaccines, but everyone, and I say everyone, I mean the majority, the masses, most people absolutely understand that vaccines are important and are vaccinated, not because they were forced to, but because they don't want to die. And so nowadays, what happened during COVID is there was a lot of question about that. And there were people who dissented, and those people who dissented were sidelined, like Bhattacharya, for example. Yeah. Right or wrong, that's not even the point.
He is Trump's new what?
NIH lead.
Right.
But he's an economist. He's not a doctor. But, so he, people like that. And when they got power, they are now saying, we're going to show you what it felt like. So it's not about no one. I mean, would RFK vaccinate his daughter against HPV? I think probably. Actually, you're not going to hear about it.
I think the point you're making about the attitude, but I don't think it's. I think two things can be true. I don't fully agree. I think you're right about that, absolutely. But I also, because I, as a journalist, covered the anti-vax movement long before Trump, long before COVID. I was interviewing Peter Hotez before anybody knew who Peter Hotez was. Of course, I'm talking about the whole link between autism and vaccines. Like, he wrote the book, My Daughter is Autistic, and it wasn't because of vaccines. That was like the title of or Vaccines Didn't Cause My Daughter's Autism was literally the title of the book. And I've seen that conspiracy theory gain. But it's also true as a result of COVID, as you said, and many other things, that people have less and less trust in experts and institutions like you and Harvard. Why?
Well, because they feel like they were lied to. I think, listen, when someone comes out saying something like vaccines cause autism, right? If someone says that, they only have a platform if people are receiving that information and acting on it. And the big shift that has happened is not that there are more people that are saying it or believing it. It's that the public, to your point earlier, is being more receptive to some of this stuff that is antithetical to science. And the reason for that, again, comes back to what I said earlier, that people are pissed off. There are a lot of people who live in the middle ground, who are not the big, who are not on the podcast, who are not, who are not, aligning with I basically will say like the Bill Maher's of the world. Yeah. Like there are a lot of people like that, myself included, by the way. I would call myself a Bill Maher Democrat. Like I live in that space where I believe a couple of these things. I believe a couple of these things. And I don't do the whole, like, you have to be 100% to be in my camp. And so because I live in that world, what ends up happening is the Republicans can get angry with you. The Democrats can get angry with you. And you sort of live alone in this space and you start to get angry because you start to believe that, like, people are not listening and they're just going into whatever group.
Well, I mean, I don't like you putting yourself in that category of Bill Maher Democrat. I think the better way to say it, and the way he would say it too, would be, not being for purity tests. But I don't know. I'll push back on it in that, you told me you're from India, your family was, and Bill Maher's view on Islam, I don't know what your view or if you're a religious, is pretty bad. And rolling up to them, not much less on gender issues, but I take your point. But I'm sure you know about all that.
But the whole thing with Bill Maher and Islam is like, we got to have his whole thing is you got to have a conversation about it. It's not that, bad or good. I mean, and me and him obviously disagree. We're not Muslim, my family.
I don't think you're doing a good job summarizing his whole view on Islam is that we got to have, he has made that's the one thing I've tracked. So, and I don't like any religion. I'm a critic of all the religions, for sure. I don't like any of it. So, anyway, you can push back if you want one more time on Bill Maher or religion, or we can go back to medicine.
No, that offline. But I'll say the one thing. I am a complete free speech absolutist. That is where I do live. And so I think one of the problems has been that we are stifling a little bit of that on both sides. And that's making the normal middle people irritated. And that is what is resulting in this backlash against some of the stuff that otherwise we would just accept as the norm, because people are starting to question, to your point, experts, because they're looking at experts and saying, you are not actually an expert. You are trying to push a political agenda, even though the science is opposite to what's coming out of your mouth. And, politics is feelings, politics is how you go in the voting booth, you close the door and you do what you need to do. No one's checking on you. And so if you believe that the person in front of you is talking garbage just because they're trying to align with a certain political ideology and it's not the science, you are going to reject everything coming out of their mouth. And by the way, that's the way science works as well. Something is only a fact if nothing else goes against that fact. Then it just becomes a thought.
I love talking about politics and your thoughts on all of it. Let me go back just to one more question of medicine, and I'll let you go. What are you, most fired up, most concerned about right now with what you're seeing with this administration or with legislation that's moving? This big, bad, beautiful bill obviously would seem to cut millions of people off of Medicaid or, remove access for a lot of people from health insurance. That certainly seems like a high priority. But what is it that you're watching that you're most concerned with, whether it be the appointments, the people that he's putting in place, or the policies that he's either instituting or removing? I heard the HHS put out something filled with like errors and bullshit from AI or something. Like that's crazy.
Called the Maha Commission report. Yeah. It basically cited 7 articles that do not even exist, let alone that they, and when they were questioned about it, they said, well, it was a formatting error, but I don't know about you, but when I, hit enter on Microsoft Word, it doesn't insert 7 random made up, I don't know what they were using. Probably, I guess I do know what they were using, ChatGPT, but which does, by the way, make up citations. But the thing that I'm most concerned about right now actually transcends it's the ideology that's going along with this administration, which is, again, what I said earlier, the fundamental crux, the engine seems to be driven by this idea of we want to screw everyone we believe screwed us over the last X amount of years. And we will do whatever it takes. It is the ultimate, let's cut off our nose to spite our face.
Yes.
What really bothers me about this particular administration is that they're doing this distraction thing. Let's talk about Skittles and how Skittles has this potentially carcinogenic, cancer, inducing dye in it. But simultaneously, like within the 24 hours, kick 8 million people off of insurance. Like, what are you talking about? And these people can read and write. They know what they're doing, but it's working on the American public, which is really sad and speaks back to our ability to critically analyze things, our education system, and of course our media, not feeding us. I'm not going to be able to do a deep dive into every single thing. I expect when I turn on CNN, Fox, or MSNBC, they're telling me the truth so I can make an informed decision. And we all know they're not. And I think those are the sorts of things that are really they've caused a cancer in our society. Yeah. And what worries me a lot is that we are sort of a fertile ground right now, we the American public, for bullshit. And unfortunately, we're being fed it and it's growing within us and unfortunately making us make decisions that are incorrect.
Well, the fact that you're putting your voice out there in between surgeries to combat that bullshit, which is at the very top of bullshit mountain that you're climbing up, is really important. I'm really happy to have you and add your voice to the mix of healthcare professionals that we talk to here that are doing good work. What do you want to leave listeners with besides, I can plug the healthcarefораction.com and it's all in the links. Go support. What else?
the biggest thing I want to leave you guys with is we're all connected. And I'm not saying that in a huggy sort of, kumbaya sort of way. I mean, like, this is our America. I just read a thing this morning. There was that attack that happened, where the cocktails were thrown on people.
In Boulder, where the guy made a handmade flamethrower, yeah.
And there was a woman who got burned who was she was like 82-year-old or 88-year-old Holocaust survivor. And she said it best. She said, this is not the America I know. We're better than this. We are better than this. We are the world leaders. The whole world comes here to be, to work with each other and to build great things. Let's get behind what we always got behind, guys. Money. Okay. And do things properly and try to help each other in the process. I mean, that's what makes this country so absolutely beautiful. And we got to get back to that. This is not helping anybody. And we are going to get completely surpassed by other countries and ultimately lose our cultural identity if we don't stop it.
I love that message, but I gotta say, and I hate to push back on you on that at all, but I want to get your take because I'm sure you will disagree. And God, I'm also pushing back on an 82-year-old Holocaust survivor, but it is who we are. We're the most violent people in the world.
Nah, bro, we're not. Everybody sucks. Everybody sucks. Every single community, the indigenous people, the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Chinese, the Africans, all the Europeans, all of us. You know why? Because we're all from the same genetic code. And with that there were like 20 different species of humans. We are not.
You're talking about psychology, and if that's the case, in all those other countries, they don't allow weapons of war to be ubiquitous. They do something about that. They prevent that so people won't be violent, because in all those other places, they might be able to kill you with a knife a lot easier, drive through a crowd of people. But only in America do we sanction the killing of these guns. Like, when she says that's not who we are, if she's talking about violence, I would argue we are more violent than other nations. It is our culture. It is who we are. And obviously you don't agree with that.
No way. No, I think I think that's one of the big things about the us and them. Like, we are all the same level of jacked up, and we need to work together as a group to make sure that resources. I mean, remember, go back to evolution. Ultimately, if you're resource rich and it's distributed decently, I'm not saying that you don't. I'm all about merit. You have to work, and then when you work, you get what you're given. I don't believe that you just spread out the wealth, but I do think that, like, when you have a resource rich environment and everyone is doing decently and can afford their car payment, can afford their house, and their kids are happy, we are human beings. Human beings will not fight. Animals will not fight. But if you take a bunch of starved lions and you throw a piece of meat between them, they are going to fight each other. And the other countries, I agree with you about the gun control. Obviously, I do. But that doesn't mean that they're less or more violent. That just means that's just talking about the means.
But this is not who we are, is the point I get hung up with. All the violence with the guns. We will not pay for our neighbor's health insurance. I don't want to pay for that guy. And we put people to death. That's the rest of the world looks at us and says, we can't believe you do all of those things. And more importantly than anything else, a lot of these other countries, they believe in shared sacrifice. This country has not made a shared sacrifice in my lifetime. And I was in New York in 9/11. There was no shared sacrifice. There is no shared sacrifice. Last one we had was World War II. Do you disagree?
Oh, of course. And I'll tell you why. Because we've made the biggest shared sacrifice of all. And that is, we have welcomed other people from other nations. All the other
Not
nations.
anymore.
So I was born in Scotland.
Not anymore.
In Oman. I'm from India. And I've lived in a variety of countries and done a lot of medical missions. And I'll tell you this. If you go to other countries, you see a homogeneous group of people. Right. And in the areas where they've attempted to bring in other people to make their societies better, they've actually kind of isolated them to certain areas with claiming, your own language and your own life, and you'll be able to move. Actually, in our country, we've said, here, our institutions are open to the best and the brightest.
Immigration is not having a robust immigration program, and diversity, which Canada has more than we do, is not a sacrifice. It's an asset. It's not a sacrifice.
No, it's a sacrifice because you're sacrificing what you believe to be so think of the UK. So the United Kingdom has a certain type of culture, or India. Let's take India. Certain type of culture. Now, when you bring people from the outside and the culture mixes and gets better, which we all know that's what happens because America's done it. And you have the social mobility. We are the only country where a person can come from the street and go all the way up and become the CEO.
That's not true.
It is.
No, it's not. It's factually untrue. UK has social mobility is measured in economics, and Paul Ryan famously said Europe has more social mobility than America. It is not true that you can make more
gains in America than other countries. That's false, and it's measurable.
No, it is true, and I'll tell you the reason
it's
why.
It's an anecdote. It's a feel-good thing to say. It's not true.
It is. I mean, the data.
No, you can measure these things.
They're correct. And in the United States, we have people that are coming in one generation and going from nothing all the way.
That's true. And that's true. And it's more true. You're saying by immigration, you have more of an opportunity to immigrate in America and make more of yourself than in other countries in terms of immigration.
No, in terms of immigration and the people living in the country. There is a lot of it's not social mobility when it comes to just like money, right? So if you've got old money and
any measure
in society, you are in a certain social class. You also have extreme, like with us, we've got complete free speech. We've got the ability to stand up and say what we want. Other societies do not have it the way
we do. I mean, all that's like all those things that you're saying, by the way, are leaving us. We definitely don't have complete free speech.
That's a different argument. Leaving us, but we are that. We started that.
I mean, other countries have similar free speeches than we do, and I would argue we're limiting ours a lot more than many other countries. And
the United Kingdom doesn't have. You can. Go
they invented it. It's pretty close. Pretty close.
But the point is this country, I think this is the only place, even when I go visit abroad and stuff, I mean, the way that we are as a people to each other, the way that the institutions, I mean, everything is the best and the brightest here. And that's why, I mean, and we're losing it. I do agree with that.
I mean, universities, I agree with you that the universities are the best in the world. I don't think anybody disagrees. But my point was we have not made a shared sacrifice. And your answer was immigration. And I think that is an asset to everywhere. Sure, it rubs people the wrong way to have new languages and there are problems and it creates friction. I think that's what you were illustrating. But immigration is an asset, which is why there's no special interest lobbying against immigration. It's just racist policy, really. The farm industry, the restaurant industry, healthcare industry, they all want these people here because they screw them. They can pay them less and they work really hard. It's an asset, not a sacrifice.
But I wasn't talking about that. So there's two types of immigration, right? And as an immigrant, I'll tell you what I mean. There is immigration where I physically, okay, here, take this analogy. I come to your home, I knock on the door, and you let me enter. I come in, I'm a guest in your house. You give me a room, you bring food to my room, and I come out and I clean your dishes and I go back to my room every single night. That's one type of immigration, and that's the type of immigration that the rest of the world does. I'm talking about the immigration we do, which is what our culture is, where I would actually come to your home, knock on the door, and become a part of your family. And I would sit at the table with you, and I would make your house, home, and everything better. That's what America is. And so people from all over the world and our own people as well blend together. And in one generation, we're able to take and make a country that allows us to dissent, allows us to think outside of the box and to create these things that, frankly, in the other parts of the world, they just don't do. Things are changing. But even in China, which is like kind of our quote unquote biggest rival, you send a text message in China, it takes forever for it to even get through because God knows what screening mechanisms it's going through. This is the only country that right now doesn't do that. But that's what that woman was saying, the Holocaust survivor, that this is not us. But if we keep going the way that we're going to end up being one of these banana republics.
I love this debate, discussion, all of it. I know I've gone way over my time. I have to count. I think the text messaging thing is a little bit of a red herring. I mean, I could look at China, I'm sure, but certainly Japan and many other countries that have trains that bring you, so much more efficiency and almost all kinds of transportation systems, housing, everything that do way better than us with similar comparisons. But the shared sacrifice point is something I'm really hung up on, and I'd love for you to think about that more and get back to me because I want to be wrong about that. My country does not do anything that is a sacrifice, a shared sacrifice, the way previous generations here, and I think current generations do in general, certainly when it comes to healthcare and other ideas and issues. We do not do it here, and I think it's shameful. But I'm happy, I'm happy to be wrong about it. So let's keep going, I guess.
I'd love to hear. I mean, I'd love to hear what you mean in other countries. What you mean by shared? Because when I think about it, I think America is kind of the only place that does it. So we've got like polar opposite views. So maybe we're
well. For example, right now Canada is not buying American goods as a sacrifice. They like them. It's not like they don't like Jack Daniels, but they're not going to do it anymore because they want to coalesce around an idea. They have different ideas about community. America is about the individual. It's not about even your neighbor anymore. And so there are all kinds of other sacrifices, certainly in underdeveloped countries, certainly in countries with, every tribal system has a shared sacrifice. Obviously, probably a lot more about all of that than I do. I mean, I think I could go on and on about other countries and their shared sacrifices. In Israel, you have national service. A lot of countries require you to serve. That is a sacrifice for a lot of people. If America did that, some kind of service, not necessarily military, we'd consider that maybe something that you did that was a sacrifice. In the end, you'd benefit from it. But we don't do that. Not since World War II I don't think have we done that.
But I guess that's my point. That's our identity. If you ask people what the golden era or whatever is, they usually talk about World War II and that. So we are, I don't know if we are saying the same thing, but I think that's what that lady was saying. And that's also what I am saying, that America fundamentally, exactly, World War II is a perfect example where everyone came together and we saved people after. Granted, we had to get hit first to actually get involved in the war. But when we did, we saved the whole place. So I don't know if that's out of our DNA. I think that ultimately, though, individualism is also fundamental to this country being successful. And you can have individual tendencies without losing the entire country, because ultimately it does benefit the individual to have the whole country move ahead. If we have a situation in India, again, you have a dichotomy of extremely rich people and extremely poor people. And the extremely rich people suffer as much because when they enter on the street, you have a rabid dog. You can't get public transport. Sure. So they're suffering too because only 2% of the population pays into taxes. You want to talk about shared sacrifice? What about the taxes that we pay here? What about the Medicare, Medicaid system? 50% of people, what about the fact that tomorrow, if you're homeless, there are homeless shelters and we do a lot of things that other countries don't have the infrastructure and don't pay into.
But they do. And the best countries in the world are in Scandinavia. You might not want to measure them because they're smaller populations and they're more homogenous. But certainly their idea, in America, I don't know if you disagree with this, but I'm in the trenches in my local school board. And I've been an advocate in public education for 20 years. We have been, the right in America has been trying to destroy public education, which built this country. And every other great country in the world has a public education system where there's not a component of competition. All the kids try to have similar access. There's not segregation. There's no religion in the schools. They're trying to charterize and privatize public education, which limits the opportunity, which is why one of the reasons that social mobility is not as good as countries that have robust public education. So, mention any policy or any system, and I think I could probably tell you why we don't have a sense of shared sacrifice and why other countries do it way better. Your idealized, romanticized America is very interesting to me.
No, but it's funny, you're talking about the charter school.
And I think I do think it matters that I'm a white straight man and that you're a brown Indian woman, and I'm not sure if you were born here or whatever, but I think it's interesting to hear us argue, like I'm shitting on America and you're romanticizing.
I love America. No, but
it might be your perspective. It's probably your perspective.
But if you talk to immigrants, they will stand with what I am saying. It's interesting. You're right. It is interesting.
Yeah, but because of the countries that they come from, and that's not my point. My point isn't
the countries that they come from.
But my point isn't that America isn't better than Honduras. My point is that America is not nearly as good as Canada or most Western Europe.
It is. We have right now the wait times for healthcare. Let's talk about healthcare.
The leading cause of death in children is guns. In Canada, it's like what?
But that's not the only metric to measure.
It's a big one.
Good. But the GDP, let's go with that. If we're going to talk about, what metric are we going to use? But back to your school point.
Death of children is my metric.
But that's fine. But that is important to say that, we're talking about social mobility, then we're talking about the children, then we're talking about how do you get to a point where you say that one country is quote unquote better than another? Obviously that is the problem, that you can't. You so gently brushed past quickly. Oh, Scandinavia, small and homogenous. Yes, exactly. Yeah. You can't brush past it. That's it's small and homogenous. So if we went backward, and that's some of the problem with kind of the sometimes with the progressive thinking, that it's like, if you say that small and homogenous means better, but then at the same time say immigration is good, Like, which way do you want to, because, you know, in my opinion, is the immigration make things better. But now Scandinavia, those countries that
the caveat in the argument,
issues, right? In those specific, but in terms of your education, I'd love to hear your thought on this, given what you said about that. What is your view on the idea of taking out all gifted programs so that the playing field is leveled? What's your view on that? Because I'm fully against that. And that's something that some of these schools are doing, which is why people are pulling their kids out and putting them in private education.
I think that every question on public education comes back to resources. So I think that might work in one school where it's definitely not going to work in a lot of schools. Unfortunately, in America, our schools are funded by property taxes. So if you're not rich, you don't get as good of an education. That is not the way it works in the rest of the world. And so a caveat, I'm giving you the caveat about Scandinavia being small and homogenous, but all I'm saying is all the schools still have similar funding. You have healthcare opportunities. You made the point, which is the best point made about health and education, that we all know. Pre-K determines outcomes at 18 more than anything else. America don't have it. The rest of the world does, and it's not because they're small and homogenous. It's the best capitalist idea in the world is to invest in poor places with where the kids' brains are developing pre-K at the most. But we don't do it because we fucking hate poor people here.
Well, maybe, yes. That is definitely something, because there's this whole idea of, like, you know, incorrect idea that, like, if someone is poor, it's their fault, which is obviously untrue. But, like, the interesting thing about this conversation is that, exactly, I align with you totally. For example, you know, getting money to go into pre-K so people can get that pre-K education, and then holding parents accountable in the same way that we do in the public health system, where it's a law that your child has to be in school till 12th grade. Sure. We would do the same thing for pre-K. But the thing about that is I don't hear, and I have not, unless you've heard it recently, I have not heard Democrats and progressives who are the ones that should be pushing this agenda. We're busy talking about affirmative action for college level stuff, like I mentioned. I haven't heard anything about the other end. You got to back it up and do something about it. You can't just whine about it.
You were too busy saving people's lives and studying medicine while I was covering the movement for universal pre-K. It was huge. It failed because of Republicans. And the idea that you would say we're too busy talking about this than that, you know, I don't love that type of an argument. If you want, you can have that every day. We're talking about this, not that. I would say go put universal pre-K into Google, hit news, and see how many articles come about it. But the important answer to your question would be, was there legislation? Yes, there was. It was proposed. I believe it failed because of the Senate filibuster. The vast majority of Americans support it. It is expensive, but the investment, the bang for the buck, is the best investment ever. But there's no doubt Democrats have been fully in support of universal pre-K, and Republicans don't like it.
But then maybe that's what we should leave people with, right? So then instead of saying that these are all the problems, which is what we keep talking about, right? And then going to things like these overarching statements that, for example, we're the most violent community, which, again, I totally disagree with. I think all humans are equally violent and bad, and given the opportunity, will do negative things and positive things. Humans are the same. There is nothing, when you cross the border from Wisconsin into Canada, you don't.
But you're talking about human, I hear you. You know more, but you're talking about human nature. And I would argue that human nature also would include the idea of creating policies and laws. America will not protect children. Other violent humans who are equally as violent will. Thus, we are not the greatest nation on earth how am I doing? I'm so intimidated.
Well, no, not at all. The thing about it is, though, that most Americans, so, like, do you remember the last time, and I can't, do you remember the last time you spoke to an American where they did not agree that we need gun control and that children should be protected? Everyone I know believes that. So the question is, why are we not making it into policy? That's the real question.
No.
How are we getting these people elected that don't allow these sorts of things? And I'll tell you, this is another topic, but this is my, because I do politics. I think there are three words that have destroyed the way the American system works, and that is campaign finance law. I think that's why we can't get our people who believe, even our own senators and congressmen to believe that, they should make these changes, but they don't. So if we really want to make a difference and a splash, I think we should be focusing on these other issues.
There's no doubt about it. But the reason, unfortunately, and I made that argument forever until media went nuts and became ubiquitous and there are no rules. And now I believe that even if we had strict campaign finance issues, you would still have Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk saying crazy shit, which influences voters' thinking, which primaries even mainstream Republicans and elects fringe people who believe that the moon is made of cheese. On the gun issue, you're wrong. I've been covering it. I've interviewed these people. They definitely do not want controls on guns, and they have to sign.
That's because the way that first of all, like I said, I've never.
And by the way,
the question was, do we have people who believe that it is acceptable to have guns kill our children? And the answer, of course, to that is no. But what I'm saying is that when you have a situation where these guys are in control, there's only one way that you can get it to change. And that is you got to infiltrate it, okay, obviously, and be at the top. And you got to be able to make those decisions that are going to keep you in power. Why do these people say these psycho things? Because they don't want to give an inch. Because they believe that today you're going to take the guns, by having whatever, law out there. And the next step is going to be that suddenly all guns are going to go away, like what happened in Australia or in Britain. That's what they're afraid of. And they believe that that's their constitutional right. And that's going to get taken away.
And they care more about the constitutional right than the health of America's kids. They do.
Yes.
And the other issue on guns is obvious. States have passed laws. Tons of Democrats in legislatures across the country have passed laws. But then the U.S. Congress cannot pass a law because of the Senate filibuster. The House, the vast majority of Americans overwhelmingly agree, to your point, on gun controls. But because this is why America's not the greatest, because our congressional system has the United States Senate, where in Wisconsin, or rather Wyoming, they have 600,000 people, and that guy gets an equal vote and say as the California senator with over almost 40 million people. That's why we don't have gun control. That's why we don't have a lot of good things in America. This is why America is not great. As great as other countries.
That's not a fundamental problem with the people, though. So we can't say that is a problem with the institution and the way that it initially, when it was set up, made sense, because at that time you would have the entire country run by California, New York, and Massachusetts.
I'd ask you to look into why the Electoral College was set up.
Well, I know why. That's what I'm saying.
It was slavery.
Originally, because
it was slavery.
But yes, of course. But also the point remains that if we were to do it that way today, there would be certain states that would be not represented. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know how we get Wyoming represented and what their needs are locally, on a federal level, and simultaneously allow California to just do it by numbers. I don't know what the answer is. But I do think that what you said earlier about the smaller places where people are sort of homogenous obviously takes away this particular problem. So instead of America, the beauty of the United States actually is that we can change this. And unless we don't have another election and God knows what's going to happen. But if we stay the way that we are, we can change it. And that's the way that we should do it, with things like Healthcare for Action, getting the right people in there, term limits that make sure that it doesn't matter. You don't make it a lifelong thing that you're going to be a congressman for 1,000 years, and take away this campaign finance stuff that 50% of a congressman's time is just raising money. And then we can have these changes made.
And the most important one to me, because I disagree, is what we're doing, media. I think this is as important as all of those other issues, to try to influence people's thinking. I think our conversation today will do just that and give people a lot to think about, and I really appreciate it. One more, compulsory voting. My friends in Australia, they have to vote. What do you think?
I'll give you that. I like that.
You like it?
No, hold on. Yes, they should vote. But I do think that there should be something. We got to do something about people being informed so that they can vote being informed.
That's hard. I don't have an answer for that.
But you can't just have people make decisions, because look where we are today.
The answer for that was I think the answer to that, a government solution, was funding public radio, public television. We can argue about whether or not that should continue or it's effective, but I think that was the only, in terms of being informed. But anybody can say anything. Somebody can go on. Yeah. You are a vascular surgeon from Harvard. And some jackass is getting his views. I'm sorry, millions of them are getting their views on even vascular surgery from some jackass who doesn't even have a degree than you. That's the problem.
That is the problem. But then how do we do that? So it's that slippery slope, right? Where do we say we're going to censor information? And that was the whole thing with Facebook and all the issues and stuff that are happening now. How do we get the message out? And then, not to be ridiculous, but the alternative facts whole debacle. somebody believes something, right, and says it and then shows their data, and somebody else believes something and shows their data, and then the public has to have the ability to critically analyze and decide what they believe is right. And some of that might come from moral discrepancy. Like one person might believe one thing and one person another. And how do we, in a country like America that is unique, and to your point about having the heterogeneous mix, how do we have a country where we have so many different trains of thought and just have the facts? I mean, you said about National Public Radio. Sure, amazing. Of course, we should have National Public Radio. But you cannot then infuse politics into that. It needs to be boring ass reporting.
Yeah, well, no one will listen.
These are the studies.
Yeah, but and they might have listened had it been the only option, but they're not listening now if it's boring, which is why I've always called my show NPR with a heartbeat or with a personality. But I mean, I think the answer to your question is coming back to a point that you made again. The answer is education. So a lot of Americans think that when Trump signs an executive order, that's a law, because they don't know how a bill is made, and it's ironic, or not ironic, but PBS had that, viral hit when we were younger, how a bill is made. I'm just a bill, that whole cartoon that taught us. Now, Americans don't know that. So Americans, we took
civics out of our education system. And why did we do that? We have to go back to the root of stuff. What do we need? You need humanities, you need science, math, civics. And I think, that with all these conversations and all these problems that we're having right now will be tempered significantly if you can go back to the root cause of things. And the fact of the matter is, sadly, you and I are sitting here, we're educated, we are elite in that liberal elite sort of thing. Please, we both are. But, people, the majority of the people out there are just trying to go to their job, get their paycheck, pay their bills, and take care of their kids. And here we are, talking shit back and forth and thinking it's going to get taken. And, it's tough for them to listen to all this and then put on the news and see that ultimately, egg prices are going up. I can't afford a house. Yep. And somebody comes on and says, don't worry about it. I'm going to fix it for you. It's hard not to say, yeah, I love that. I want to do that too. I mean, I know a lot of educated people also who voted this way, who are now regretting their vote. But, there was a lot of identity politics and stuff on the other side that pushed people the wrong way. And now I think we need to come back or it's going to be lost. So ultimately, I think that's the most important thing. I agree education is the way to go, but we have to agree on what education is. And education is things like civics, some of the hard truths, and actually having things where people who are more intelligent or more willing to work can move ahead. And that was the America that I grew up in. And that's the type of place that I want to be back to. It's not everybody is equal. It's that everyone gets equal treatment and that everyone has an equal starting point. That's the world I want to live in. Not that everyone just is equal, because that is a society that is going to be downgraded.
That's not a realistic ideology. I don't think that anybody's ever necessarily pushing. But, I said 20 minutes and we did over an hour. So you must have a conference or a surgery or anything that's more important than this. I will let you go. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed this and appreciate you joining me. And hopefully I didn't come off in any way arrogant or mansplaining or talking about things that I have no idea about.
Oh my God, no. See, we got to do stuff like that. Not at all. No, you got to be able. This is the other thing, right? We can't do this anymore. I wish you were with me right now so we could go get a drink together. That'd be awesome, right? High five and hang out. But in America, we've lost this. This is what we used to do, right? And
yes and no. I mean, I don't think
weird about it nowadays. We can't do it.
No, I agree with you, but I don't know why. I was just being polite.
Yeah, but it's if I'm wrong and you're like, lady, you're wrong. Here are the facts. Good. Thank you for educating me. I'm into it. That's not mansplaining. That's being normal. You know what I mean?
To be fair, yeah, we didn't really do much that required conversation too much about gender, and if we did, I certainly whatever. But you're right; it's not mansplaining. It's just I'm the host of this show. I bring on experts. I try to ask them questions, and that's the main goal. And you answered everything, and it was really interesting and informative, and I loved it. And I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it. Lovely to meet you.
You too. There you go. That is it. What did you think? I'd really love to hear from you. More of that, less of that type of conversation and guest. Always want to hear from listeners and subscribers. Cannot do the show without you. Appreciate your support and your insight, input, contributions in any way that you make them. What a wonderful, amazing group we have. I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. It is Monday after all. I host the Happy Hour Hangouts Mondays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. One of the best benefits of your paid subscription is that you'll always get an invite to those. That's all I've got for you today. Go download John Carroll's new album, johncarroll.org.
And I will hopefully see you tonight or talk to you tomorrow. Let me know who you want to hear from this week on the show. I haven't booked it all out yet. I like to stay nimble and try to understand what's happening in the world with our guests as always. So let me know who you want to hear from, and I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up. Now go take a breath and take care of yourself so you can take care of the rest of the people that matter and are here.
You got to stand.